Please welcome back Time's senior health writer and co-chair of today's summit, Alice Park.
Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed lunch and were able to meet some new people, start some meaningful conversations. We've had an amazing morning, and we want to thank our partners, the Alzheimer's Association, the Rockefeller Foundation, Khosla Ventures, and Smartsheet for this summit, for helping us to put on this summit. And to keep the momentum going, yes, to keep the momentum going, it is now my honor to introduce our 42nd president, Bill Clinton, and my summit co-chair, Dr. David Agus.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is a cool place. I've never been down here before.
I know, not bad views, eh?
Yeah, I used to have an office near here, but this is a new facility, and it's great.
It's got a great bar in the corner. It's got a... So...
Is that...
I'm joking.
That doesn't sound like your book.
President Clinton, you just told me backstage that you just went to your 55th high school reunion. Compare yourself today to the day you graduated high school.
I weigh 3 pounds less than I did. But it's slightly differently distributed. We had quite a lot of mortality in the last 5 years in our high school class. But in the early years, I've only missed one reunion. We have them every 5 years, and I've only missed one when I had to send a military action in Kosovo in 1999. So I missed my 35th reunion, but we had a reception at the White House the next day for the people that we could get up there, and they're important to me, and I've watched the aging process unfold and all my friends, and the ones that have done the best, I think, are the ones that are basically were then and are now optimistic. I mean, we had some, as you would expect, it was a class of about 350, and you had the accidents, the deaths. We lost 4 in Vietnam. But it's been really interesting to watch, and now we even have the children of some of our classmates who've died come to our reunions because their parents died young, and those of us who loved them wanted to see them, so they show up.
That's
It's great.
I want to go and talk about health. Health and food represent about a third of the U.S. economy. In the current election, all we're talking about is healthcare finance. Nobody's really talking about health. And, September 22nd, 1993, you famously held up that card in your speech, and you called for coverage for everyone. And obviously, there have been advances, but there have been also declines. Where's your head now with where we are, with where Obamacare ended, where now Trump is beginning, or the last 2.5 years? Where are we in healthcare in this country?
Well, when the bill that passed was the best bill that could pass. Mm-hmm. You had to pass these things, and back then we actually had a filibuster, which, for reasons of convenience, Senator McConnell completely did away with. And this last moment to get the last 2 members of the Supreme Court. But anyway, we got 20 million more people insured. In the beginning, I thought it had a fair chance to work because the Medicaid expansion was a good deal economically for the states, and because there was a theory that they wanted to pursue that would get large numbers of people in pools and exchanges so that it could be affordable. Now, what happened was when the Congress repealed the mandate, but the most important thing they did, the administration has done that I think is negative, is to try to basically stop the open enrollment period or being well understood. The problem is the system is still entirely too complex. the premiums are going up way more than wages are going up, and the copays and deductibles and the drug prices are going up even more than the premiums. So we're kind of at a crossroads now, which is why it was interesting in 2018 election, the attempt to repeal the health care law was responsible for 70% of the advertising that the Democrats did, who won seats, won Republican seats. So, you know, my view is that we should pick the low-hanging fruit first. I think we need to pass a public option and go back to encouraging all payer systems in states so that you can have some control over costs and keep it as simple as possible. The great appeal for the single payer system is it's universal and it's simple. And it also recognizes why Medicare and Medicaid work with much lower overhead, which is that costs are more predictable.
Right.
You know, 80% of the costs in healthcare in any given year are claimed by about 20% of the people, and it's a floating 20%. So if you insure a relatively small pool, you have to overcharge people 4 out of 5 years, because if you catch the bad year, you'll get broke. And therefore, whatever we do going forward needs to recognize this. But I think there's things that can be done now on drugs, copays, deductibles, and getting people back in pools that don't by indirection get rid of the pre-existing condition elimination that was at the core of what Obamacare was all about.
I love that part, the pre-existing condition. It really is meaningful in today's world. Drug prices are, skyrocketing. Is that, in many senses, predatory practice and monopolistic. When you have a new drug, you can charge what the market will bear, not what its value is or not what it's worth. It's the only business where when competitors come in, prices go up, not go down. How do we deal with it? And more importantly, whose job is it to deal with drug prices?
Well, if the federal government doesn't do it, it won't happen.
But who in the federal government can do it?
Well, no one has the authority to do it
Right.
now, and that's important. But look, we built a great drug business in America, pharmaceutical empire, with great jobs and great companies and great new drugs. And we decided that we would be the only major country in the world to have no price restraints on drugs in the beginning, that if you got a patent, you could run the patent out with no price restraints. And the idea was that we'll keep them investing. We now know that among these drugs not covered by price restraints, more than half over the last decade have come from government-funded research, not the companies. And so by having no price restraints, all we do is give the companies more money to advertise the drugs that you're supposed to go hit up your doctor to prescribe for you. And I think it's a mistake. There are many other countries that have vibrant pharmaceutical industries. Germany does, Switzerland does, France does. There are many countries that do this. And we're the only one that has no price restraints. So the thing that can be done legally now is at least this doesn't cover the breakthrough drugs that cost $250,000 or more. But on basic things still under patent is you could give the government the power to bargain for lower priced drugs in the way large employers do. And I think it should be done.
It's a hell of a customer. They're certainly buying a lot.
Yeah, we're buying a lot. And I just think it's a really, it's not a tenable situation. The argument we had in the beginning, which built these companies, grew up in an era, I might add, where corporate law was different. From World War II until the late 1970s, this statement that the Business Roundtable just issued, that corporations operate for the benefit of their customers, their employers, their suppliers, and the communities they're a part of, and their shareholders. That was the law of the land, and it started changing in the late 1970s. Well, I mean, I'm so old, when I went to law school, that's what they taught us in corporate law, that was the law. And it seems ludicrous now. So now there's this big debate, and the young president of Walmart drove the business council in putting out this statement. But that's not the rule anymore. So we need some bridling on this. And I think that allowing the government to negotiate the prices would make a big difference.
You know, when I look at you now, you've got new jewelry on your left wrist here. What's that?
My Fitbit. If our friend Steve Jobs were around, he'd chew me out, because
I agree.
He'd say, "Why aren't you wearing my watch?" And I said, "This one costs less." And it's good, it tells me everything, because I forgot to put it on last night, so I can't tell you how long I slept. But I wear it every day.
I'm not sure you actually sleep. I mean, when I looked at what you've accomplished since your presidency, it's astonishing. With the Clinton Foundation, with CHAI, what you've done for so many communities, it truly is astonishing the impact that you've made. And certainly, I think all of us here are thankful for that aspect. When you look now at what's going on in our country, especially with the opioid crisis, it's amazing to me is that we now give a drug that basically turns off every neuron in the body, that is opioids, and we don't have the technology to turn off ones that are on for pain. And yet there's very little resources being put into it. A lot of it is companies are being afraid to being sued if they develop something new. So believe it or not, tort reform can help dramatically the opioid crisis, but we have to do something different there. What are you?
Look, the opioid problem last year killed 70,000 people, which is a number more than the people who were killed by guns and car crashes combined. And I know pain's a big problem, but as you know this better than me, a lot of drugs that are just in the next lower class and not addictive could handle 90% of those problems. These things are being prescribed. For a long time, we didn't control the volume. We didn't control a lot of things. And it's still a real problem. I think that there are places here. You have a person I think did a great job in Baltimore in this crowd. We know we can do more with stopping overdoses immediately with Narcan. We know we can do more to wean people off with the places that allow methadone and buprenorphine to use to wean them off. I'm trying to do what I can to change the environment a little bit. We've got a still small but growing project involving faith leaders to try to go out in communities and remove the stigma and make this a health issue, not a sickness issue. But I can't think of anything that's happened since your last book, The Lucky Years, came out. I can't think of anything else that's actually decreased life expectancy like this has. And we're still not. The Congress, I will say this, one of the things that has sort of escaped public notice is the Congress on a bipartisan basis has put some more money into community health centers, and so that health care is in reach of people. I remember I was in Chillicothe, Ohio in 2016, a town I know well, and a woman had sold her only asset, a used car, to rent one of the empty buildings downtown to give the only thing that could pass for drug treatment and care there. And there were a passel of doctors living in a retrofitted old building who went down there to help pay off their medical school debt to serve in underserved areas. But they weren't dealing with this directly. And so we're making some progress, but this has become, probably has surpassed childhood obesity in the short run as the #1 public health problem in America, and it's something we need to deal with.
You're generally an optimistic person. When you look at what's going on now in our country, and the debates this week and the people back and forth, Are you retaining your optimism? Do you have hope for us?
Yeah, I do. But I think if you read, the New York Times had a little small section in the Sunday paper about the 500 odd people who, they weren't odd people, more or less. There were about 523 of them, I don't remember the exact number, who were brought to Texas by I think the Helena Foundation or something like that, who were all over the map politically and socially, and to spend a few days talking to each other, and miraculously they discovered they were human beings, and they achieved a lot more consensus than you would know from reading the press every day. So the thing I'm worried about is that both the information ecostructure and the political realities push people further apart than they are and paralyze democracy, because there's more money and power to be made in the short run with division than unity. And so the voters need to stop rewarding that. But I think, for example, in 2018, I thought the press did a good job of covering the elections. My party lost some and won some. But to give you an idea of how much America has changed just through redistricting, that election was an 8.7% victory. Massive. Historic. Almost 50% more than we lost the House by in 1994. And yet, we lost 54 seats and they lost 40 because citizens stayed home at midterm, were discouraged, and the reapportionment thing is terrible. Then the Supreme Court issued a decision which said, this is not what we came to talk about, but they said reapportionment, you can be unconstitutional in reapportioning districts, but we can't do anything about it. Yeah. It's the only time in history, in the whole history of America, that a constitutional right was taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, there's a right, yes, it's been violated, but we can't do anything about it because the framers wanted the politicians to handle it. So the voters have to take a hold of this, just like health care. There has to be a sense that we are going to reward what we say we want instead of punish what we say we want. And a lot of it is just how we get our information. But I'm optimistic. I think in this next election we're going to have fair coverage. I don't think there'll be the kind of unbelievable interference there was in America by the leader of the FBI. I think Vladimir Putin will try to change the election, but he'll have to steal a lot more votes this time. And I don't think you can without getting caught, I hope. But we need simple, honest elections, and we need to talk to each other and stop treating each other like we're cardboard cutouts, and we'll get there. Every time America's been counted out so far, and we've been counted out a lot since 1776, the people that bet against us lost money. I'm betting again that they'll lose money. But,
right.
But we don't have a lot of time. And you're talking about all the time we're buying in our life. You know, I'd like to live to be 100, and it seems unlikely. I'm already the oldest man in my family for 3 generations.
But it's a different world than your family. You're going to live till 100.
It's a different world. Well, I don't know about that, but it's a different world. But 80% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere today have been dumped since World War II, half since 1990. In the previous mass extinctions on planet Earth, they took hundreds of thousands of years, except the last one, which was caused by a meteor hitting the Yucatan Peninsula approximately 65 million years ago. But even it took about 20,000 years to get rid of the people at the top of the animals at the top of the food chain, which were dinosaurs. You know, we don't have anything like that. We need to get the show on the road. So I worry about we need both the liberation and speed. Same thing we need if we want to maximize life, right? You need the liberation and speed. You were one of the first people that I ever heard pushing for the FDA to approve new medical technologies and medicines more quickly. And yet we don't want to do anything crazy. Like I had cataract surgery. It's great. It's the only thing you can do when you're old to reverse the aging process. Everything else just makes you look better for a while or slows the decline. Now, cataracts give you 20-year-old eyes. It's a great deal. But there are several countries allow these cataracts that also correct for reading, and America doesn't yet. Yeah. And my ophthalmologist said, I love you, but he said, I don't like you well enough to go to prison for, so you can't have one of those. But that turned out to be a good thing because there have been some serious malfunctions reported in some countries. But we do need to worry about, moving the advances through the system in an appropriate way. You talked about in your last book how it takes an average of 17 years, or it has historically, for a medical breakthrough to be generally recognized before it's common practice when you go to your doctor. We need to shorten that.
No, we are pig-headed and stubborn, no doubt about that. We doctors. To get normative behavior change, you need leadership. And in today's world, in the healthcare space, there's almost no leadership. The greatest leader over the last decade is probably the former mayor of New York City, when Bloomberg said, no large sodas, no trans fat. People argue nanny state good, nanny state bad, but behavior changed because with discourse came understanding. Where are we going to find the leadership to get that behavior change and health? You're vaccinating your grandchildren, I assume.
Well, first of all, I think Bloomberg was great on public health. And you've written a lot of us say you got to take responsibility for your own health. But you take responsibility for your own health in an environment. It sounds crazy to tell people, not just in Flint, but the 2,000 communities in this country that have contaminated water with too much lead in it. We just replaced the water pipes in the little town where Hillary and I live, Chappaqua. The environment in which people are supposed to be responsible has a lot to do with how responsible they can be and what else is bearing down on them. So I do think, and I'd like to see in every mayor's race in the country, public health ought to be a major issue. Public health as it applies to water systems, public health as it applies to the availability of clean, environmentally sound, affordable housing. We got a huge shortage of that, and there are 3 or 4 other self-evident public health issues that will make a difference.
Vaccines.
We've got a real, absolutely. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I think this is crazy.
It's the greatest advance we've made in medicine.
I remember the look of relief on my mother's face when I got the polio vaccine. When we actually had people my age who were victimized by polio, many of them not permanently, but it was awful. And I think we need more leadership there. We need to just say, look, there is no evidence of this. I understand that there are some autistic children who've been vaccinated. There are some autistic children who may have spent too much time outside in the sun. And I'm not trying to belittle this because it's a painful thing. Hillary helped found the Autism Caucus in the Senate. And when she ran for president the first time, she was the only person out there talking about autism every time we had a meeting. And I noticed I did like 300 little meetings, and it was the only thing that was mentioned to me by somebody at every meeting I went to. I took that to be progress. We're aware of this. We know this is something we have to deal with. But all of us, it's just human nature. You want to believe there's one simple explanation for a problem. And how vaccinations got to be it, I'm not sure.
What's the best book you've read the past year?
The best book I read the last year? The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs by a young paleontologist named Barada he was from New York, educated in Chicago. Or he's from Chicago, educated in New York, and then came back. But the reason is I learned a lot about the passage of time and how it's speeding up. And it put, the older I get, the more I try to think about real big things like astrophysics and real little things, like how long is it going to take for the benefits of the sequencing of the human genome to really work their way through the system. I spent $3 billion of your money to sequence the human genome.
It had a hell of a return, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's the highest rate of return of any, I think it's the highest rate of return of any federal investment in history. And it's only beginning. And like everybody else who's not young, I'm sorry it's taken as long as it has for some of the benefits to be manifested that ultimately will, but it's a big deal. Anyway, I read this dinosaur book because I have 3 grandchildren and they expect me to know about such things. And, but I wanted to get a feel for the 100 million years that dinosaurs were where we are. Mm-hmm. They were basically at the top of the food chain on this planet, especially after Pangea, the single mass of Earth that was here for a long time, split apart and the continents formed. And I just was interested in it because I wanted to figure out how long these massive changes that have led to species being destroyed or elevated took. And I'm just telling you, we're on a short time frame in the terms of all biological history to deal with climate change. I think we can easily do it. And I think it will actually solve a lot of the near-term challenges that artificial intelligence and robotics may present to us in terms of maintaining broad-based employment. If you change the way you produce, consume, and deliver energy, it would generate massive numbers of jobs.
Do you think it'll be solved with legislature or with technology, climate change?
Technology, but the proper legislation would make it happen a lot quicker. I mean, I got interested the other day. You remember when President Obama got so much grief for the failure of a company called Solyndra, which the federal government had loaned, as I remember, $500+ million to. Well, it was in an energy transformation loan portfolio that actually made you a profit of somewhere around $1 billion. In other words, yeah, it failed, but the others were paid back with interest. And so that was all. The other day, we gave $3.7 billion to that nuclear power plant in Georgia, which is a pink elephant.
Yeah.
So legislation would make a difference. Unleashing the creative energies will make such a difference. I've become friends with a man named Bob Inglis, who was a conservative Republican congressman from Georgia, who was defeated for re-election by Trey Gowdy, because he said 2 things. He said, I'm a devout Christian, and he had been bedridden for 5 months because of a horrible bathroom accident where he drove his teeth up into his head, and they had to be drawn down and wired shut. And so he got out after 5 months, and he said, I had 5 months to lay on my back, think and pray, and I'm still a conservative Republican. I still don't trust the government to fix anything that the market can fix, but I have changed my mind about 2 things. He said, we have got to stop hating Barack Obama. He said, this is bad for him and bad for us. He's not a Muslim, he's a Christian, he's an American, not an African. He loves his family, he loves his country. I just disagree with him about much things, but I'm never going to promote hatred of him again. And he said, the other thing is, we need to listen to John McCain and our Senator, Lindsey Graham. He's from South Carolina. In Lindsey Graham's former incarnation, pre-Trump years. He said, and accept the fact that climate change is a real problem. It's caused by human beings, and human beings can fix it. And we need to think of ways to create new markets, create new jobs, create new businesses to roll back the tide of very destructive phenomena. So today, what are we doing? The government is trying to stop the automobile companies from producing high mileage cars. And they want to roll back investments often already made by responsible natural gas companies to make sure they don't leak methane from their pipes, which is 30 times or more powerful than carbon dioxide. It's just not as voluminous in the atmosphere. But the good news about methane is it can dissipate in 7 to 12 years from the air. So if you want to buy America and the world more time to fight climate change, you should be for getting rid of methane. Because carbon stays up there 50 to 100 years, and methane goes away quickly in the scheme of things. So I think legislation matters. If we're doing nothing than to set framework and provide venture capital, if you will.
When you look at the President Clinton in his 20s, 30s, and 40s, would you change any of your health-related behaviors then? What do you look back on and said, I wish I did differently?
Yeah, I eat a lot less fried foods. My weight went up and down. I ran 20 to 25 miles a week. Normally, I've never run more than about 9 miles at a time. But I was a devoted runner. And
where did that come from? Why did you become a runner?
I was in law school, and I was going with Hillary, and she said, like most things that good that have happened to me since I met her, she said, I think you ought to start running. I wasn't. And there was a gym, that's an ancient Yale gym, that had a little track that was like eighth of a mile around. You had to run like 8 times to run a mile. And I just went over and started running it, and then I discovered I preferred to run outside, and then I just kept doing it.
It sounds like a Tom Hanks movie.
Yeah, it was, I was running around in circles before it became official policy. Anyway, that's what happened. I think, let me just say one more word about this. Your books are always reflect the tension between people's individual responsibility and the society's responsibility to create a healthy system. You also point out we spend relatively too much time on sickness and not enough time on maintaining health. I think we have to do all those things. I think people, and low-income people will take responsibility for their health if you give them the means to do it. We did this, started this Alliance for a Healthier Generation, with the Heart Association.
Which is fantastic.
And yeah, we've helped 27 million kids over the years to do this. But I never forget, we had a young man in Little Rock who was a Katrina refugee. He and his mother moved to Little Rock when, people just poured out of New Orleans. And he lost 36 pounds in one of our programs. But his mother lost 36 pounds and changed the whole diet thing. That's all really, really important. So public health matters, individual responsibility matters, but the environment will be conditioned by what we do in law. That's why you complimented Mike Bloomberg's public health measures. I think it's really, really important.
Well, Mr. President, it's one of my great privileges to have sat here with you today and the time we've spent together over the years. And I think everybody in this room appreciates what you've done for our country and will continue to do through your foundation and your work and your pushing. And we appreciate you in every way. And so thank you for spending this meaningful time with us.
Thank you.
Making DNA work for you. Please welcome 23andMe co-founder and CEO Anne Wojcicki, president and founder, Broad Institute of Harvard and MIT, Eric Lander, and Times Alice Park.
Tough act to follow, but we can do it. We can
A
do
happily
it.
impossible act to follow, so we don't have to worry.
Well, thank you, Anne and Eric, for being here. I think, in 2019, we can't talk about health without talking about genomics. So, Eric, I want to start with you. As a young researcher starting out, you were involved in one of the most incredible, I think, advances in our modern age, the Human Genome Project, mapping the Human Genome Project. Back then, did you have any idea of where we would be today? Did you think we'd be further along? Or, what did you think back then? Did you think we'd be much further along in actually treating disease? Or are you astounded when you look where we are now and what we're able to do with the genome?
So we are so much further along than I would ever imagined back in the late 1980s when that project was starting. President Clinton talked about it. He's very proud of the fact that, as he said, he spent $3 billion on this thing, and the return has been extraordinary. If you just look at economics, they measure it as something like $1 trillion return on a $3 billion government investment. But you just think about how little we knew then. So the project technically started in the last year of George W. Bush, and George Bush Sr. And to indicate how little we knew then, the State of the Union address in which he said, we're going to do this project, his staff gave him the speech, and he announced that we're going to support a human genome project. Because nobody knew what a genome was, and the staff didn't put a pronunciation guide
Little
there.
people with little pointy hats.
Little genome project. But then President Clinton, throughout his entire term, was really the funder of this with the Congress. And what's come of it has just been amazing. It got started by a whole lot of people, and it was done by a whole lot of people, but it got started because we wanted to be able to find the genes for human diseases. In the 1980s, we'd find a couple, cystic fibrosis, and one or two others. Well, since that project got done, we now know essentially all the genes for the rare genetic diseases. More than 5,000 have been discovered, and it's easy. It's like falling off a log to discover new ones. And then when you talk about the common diseases, like what's the mechanisms for common genetic diseases? Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, heart disease, things like that. We knew nothing about the actual genetic causes. Now there's more than 100,000 particular regions of the human genome associated with particular diseases. And it's changing our understanding about how diseases work. If I pick Alzheimer's, just how many people in this audience have somebody in their family or a friend or somebody they know who's been touched by Alzheimer's?
Yep.
So almost everybody here has somehow been touched by Alzheimer's. Up until recently, the only theory was it was a problem of the neurons in your brain. And all the clinical trials of the last 20 years have been working on therapies directed at those neurons. What's amazing is when you take an unbiased genetic approach and you look across the genome, 80% of the genes that we now know play a causal role in Alzheimer's don't affect neurons. They affect a certain kind of cell that cleans up debris in the brain. And so they're called microglia, for what's that worth. And suddenly researchers in the pharmaceutical industry and elsewhere are saying, oh, is that what the disease is about? We didn't know. Let's work on it. So it's that kind of arc of we knew almost nothing to now we have this explosion of information that's guiding things. And I would have never guessed, and maybe to the last point I'll make is that $3 billion that President Clinton spoke about for one genome. That's now about $500. And at the Broad Institute, we do about one human genome every 7 minutes instead of every 15 years at $3 billion. And I bet it's going to fall to $100 not so long from now. So I wouldn't in my wildest dreams have predicted where we'd get to. That doesn't mean we know everything we want to know. This is hard stuff. But I'm on the side of yeah, I would have underestimated where we're going.
Okay. And you probably could not have predicted what Anne's doing with 23andMe to have people able to spit in a little vial, right? And get their genome sequence and get a report back saying you might be at higher risk of X, Y, or Z. So we go from, the basic science here, which really made possible tests like 23andMe.
100%, yeah.
When you were envisioning the company, there was a lot of back and forth over, we're still learning about the genome. We have it mapped, but we're still learning about it, as Eric was saying. How concerned were you did you think perhaps that you were starting too soon, too early? Should you wait? Tell me a little bit about your thinking then about, were we ready at that time for a mass market, consumer-oriented genetic test? And let me just add one thing before I let you jump in there.
Yeah.
We have been running a poll on Twitter with our audience.
Oh, good.
And the question was, all morning, and the question was, have you ever had your DNA sequenced with an at-home kit? What do you think the percentages were, yes or no?
Interesting. I would say it's about 30%.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wow.
No,
wow, I'm so good.
Yes, 30% yes.
Yeah, good. My marketing team will be proud of me.
It was actually 20, so you're very close.
Okay.
20% yes, 80% no.
Oh, wow, yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah.
There's a big market there for us. Good. Gotta go. We gotta get that 80%.
We're doing your marketing research for you.
Thank you. Those 80% of people you need to spit.
But it just goes to show you that even with the familiarity that we have now with genetics and genomics, what is your task in bringing this idea to the mass market, to the public?
The beauty of what we do, it's totally new. I mean, I think the origins of 23andMe really came when I was on Wall Street, and I saw the beginning of when we started, the projects on sequencing the human genome, and then when it happened, it was actually somebody at the Broad that I had consulted with who told me, there's like, Anne, he's like, we're like kids in a candy store. The enthusiasm is so palpable. Like, there's new technology. You can do a whole genome analysis. He's like, it's amazing. Like, it's gonna crack wide open. We're gonna learn everything. And frankly, that's actually when we started the company, because to me, it was such an exciting technology that was coming out, but I didn't have the belief that it was actually gonna be introduced to the consumer anytime soon. And for all kinds of reasons, and that was part of what I learned really from my Wall Street days, like, I didn't think it was actually gonna come about in the time frame that I wanted. And also I felt like there was all this research, like the Broad is a machine, like puts out all this research that frankly we pay for as taxpayers, but I want to learn about it. So I felt like, well, why don't I actually allow individuals to get access to their genome and then see all these papers, all this taxpayer-funded research that's coming out. And there's so many mutations that are really well established, like cystic fibrosis or hematochromatosis and BRCA for breast cancer. So I felt like there was this whole world of opportunity to expose people to and help them learn about genetics and science, not through a textbook, but through the lens of their own genome. So Eric was actually one of the first people we consulted with, like in those early days. I think I crashed one of your conferences and I was like, hi. Yeah, I don't think we were invited. But we just showed up and we were like, yeah, we're thinking of launching this and introducing it to people. And it was definitely a controversial idea at that time about what is the right way to do it. And I think
Eric didn't just jump in and go, great idea.
No, I think people, the nice thing about science is people, they like to think things through. What are going to be the consequences of giving this information to people? Can they handle it? What's the right way? Do you need genetic counseling? Like, there's a lot of questions. And in some ways, technology doesn't have a lot of that. You're seeing some of those issues now with some of the other big tech companies. But like in healthcare, there's a lot of that hypothesis driven, like, what could this be? So one of the things I'm most proud of with 23andMe is we set out to do research from day one to say we're going to prove that this is actually can be a direct-to-consumer product, that people can handle results like their Alzheimer's results at home, that they can get a BRCA result actually at home. And so we set out to prove that there's a clinical validity to this, there's accuracy to this, it's analytical accuracy, and that the consumers can actually get it in a direct-to-consumer way. So now I feel like we've really proven that out, but in the beginning we had that hypothesis that we could, and it's really materialized.
It's a remarkable example of something I think that only goes on in the US. We have this thing I sometimes call the miracle machine.
Yeah.
You got the federal government, you got philanthropy, and you have industry.
Right.
And that creates this amazing virtuous cycle where we create public goods with the federal government
Yeah.
and with philanthropy that get shared all over the place, and then industry runs with that, and then it feeds back. And
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of other countries have all of those pieces working together like this. So even though in the Genome Project we were focused entirely on giving away all the data and all that, we also knew that the ultimate product was going to be that diagnostic companies and pharmaceutical companies or consumer companies would use this, and that's part of that ecosystem.
Right.
Let's talk about that data, because when the Human Genome Project first was announced, one of the novelties of it was that the data would be available to researchers.
Freely available. That's
Yes,
right.
freely available, and this was an anomaly back then. How has that, and it's really opened the door now, I think, to us thinking about collaborations, thinking about data sharing. How has that really accelerated our knowledge of the genome and what we're able to now translate, from what we learn into something useful like a treatment?
Well, the tradition in science had been you collected your data and you analyzed your data
And you hoarded
you held on to your data. The Genome Project, the going-in assumption was everything was going to be released every night freely with updates, even to folks who were competing with the Genome Project, and there were some. That has so radically changed, at least this world of genetics and genomics. Not every part of science does it right now, but in our field, we count on the fact that data sets that are being generated here, there, and everywhere can be combined. And now we're seeing in the last several years it going beyond basic research to kind of clinical applications. There's a project that we and others have been involved in starting called Count Me In, where cancer patients anywhere in the United States can sign up online. They don't have to be at a major medical center and say, I want to share my data. I'm going to spit in a tube and send it, and we'll sequence their genome. They give the Count Me In team the right to go get a slice of the tumor and look at the medical records. And what's happening is amazing. I'll give you just one tiny example. There's a very rare cancer called angiosarcoma. About 300 people a year get it, and it's not a very good prognosis. Well, by collecting patients, going online and saying anybody with it, 400 people with angiosarcoma have already signed up, maybe a third or half of all people in the United States, and some amazing discoveries happened. It turned out there was somebody, I'm not going to reveal anything, so I'll just make up the state, somebody in Alabama and somebody in Arizona, and it turned out both of them had received off-label an immunotherapy for a head and neck version of angiosarcoma, and they both had miraculous responses. Nobody would have ever put together this factoid here and that factoid there, but sequencing their genomes, looking at the properties, looking at their cancer, looking at the drug response, and bringing everybody together, the community realized, oh my God, that kind of cancer is probably very responsive to immunotherapy. And within a couple of months, a clinical trial was already being designed and is getting underway.
Wow.
And you could imagine that would remain locked up in file cabinets
Right.
forever, and it's not. And I think that's the point of data sharing.
Yeah. And
I'd say
you're
that's actually the
also-
point of a
right,
lot
I
of
just
data-
want to bring up that you're also involved in data sharing in a
Very
different
much.
way,
Yeah.
in an industry way where you're creating partnerships with
I'd say it's
industry.
more than just data sharing. Like, I think the thing that 23andMe did that truly I think we were the first at doing is making it patient or consumer centric. So it was this idea that, traditionally you go into a clinical trial and you don't get anything back. You don't get your genome back, you don't get the results back. Like, you're kind of like, you're actually seen as a human subject. Who wants to be a human subject? So we actually changed that, where we said, like, we're going to give you back your genetic information. You can download it anytime you want. You can share it with whoever you want. And the idea really was that we wanted to create a community within 23andMe, but we really wanted to empower you to say, if you want to do a study that's part of Pfizer, you can share your genome. You can share it with UCSF. You could share it with the Broad. I want to empower you. And part of it came from, ironically, a sarcoma community that we had, where they came to the 23andMe office and they were like, look, Anne, like, we're going to be dead in the next 12 months. Like, don't ask, like, we want you to share our data with as many people as possible. We want to share it with as many, I don't want to give you my sample and know it's sitting in a freezer. And I think one thing that people don't realize, a lot of samples when they're collected just sit in storage.
Yep.
And cancer patients, like especially when they know like they have a fatal illness, like they want to see progress. And so for us, part of it was driving that transparency, is that you actually have an objective. Like you deserve to be the center of your own information and knowing where is it going. And it's part of the reason why we always return papers back to our customers. We try to make sure everything's always in an open access journal, because we really feel like the only way we're really going to make meaningful progress in research is not if it's one single institution doing it, but if we actually crowdsource that together. Yeah. And that's where I said we need hundreds of millions of people, and no one institution is ever going to have that kind of scale. But in order to really find these types of associations, you need the entire world to come together and all those people to come together from all over. And you need a way that, again, they're leveraging the web to do that. So it's really about, again, it's important to share the data. We actually participate in a number of different collaborations with it. We never give out individual level data, but we do collaborate in a lot of analyses with the aggregate data. And it's really important to us that our customers feel empowered on an individual level, and that we as a company are always collaborating to try to move the needle with all of the research.
It's patients as partners,
right.
Not subjects.
Right. Correct.
And I think the patient as partner is going to be essential to make progress in all ends of medicine. Right. And basic research to what you're doing in industry, right. I think we all see that, and it's fabulous to see you're pioneering that, and it's just great to see the examples of what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ann, I just want to ask you very quickly on the flip side of what you just said. If we look at some of the statistics here, people are still a little reluctant to participate in at-home genome testing.
I think it's
what do you tell them when they raise questions about privacy, and they see things on the news like the Golden State Killer has been found because his family relatives, like through his family relatives who had uploaded, in some cases 23andMe results onto a public database.
Correct.
What do you tell people who are still very concerned about what is being done with their genetic information?
So I think there's a couple of things. So one, again, when I was investing on Wall Street, one of the things I used to love getting was like every week you get these Amazon reports of like the number of people who are willing to put their credit cards online. And it was kind of seen as amazing, like more people are shopping. Can you believe it? People are actually putting their credit cards online. And the reality is with the new technology, it just takes time for people to be comfortable with it. And I think in genetics, it takes time for people to understand, what am I going to get, exactly how is it managed, how is it being used. So I'm actually quite appreciative. Like, I'm happy with the 20 to 30% of people who are saying they have done it. There's a huge market of where it's going to go. And I think that for people, they need to feel comfortable with, like, what is this information? Like, what does it mean actually about me? And you're right, the privacy side. So 23andMe does everything we can to protect an individual's privacy, but going to the point that I brought before, we believe you own your genome and you should do with it what you want. And so people do download their genomes and say, I want to upload it into a public database so that they can find additional relatives. And those are the databases that have been used for things like the Golden State Killer. Mm-hmm. So the reality is that as a society, we actually all have DNA in common. And that's one of the more challenging aspects of privacy, is that, like, for instance, if I have my genome and I make it public, it has implications for both my sisters and my children. So people need to be aware of that. And we try to make sure that when we are consenting our customers, that people actually know about this. So there's always going to be those public databases. 23andMe, though, again, has a very clear privacy practice that it's your information. You have the opportunity to consent if you want to share it. You also have the opportunity to never share it. And so it's really the power, we're trying to give the power back to the individual to control what do they want to do with their genetic information.
Well, we're clearly at the beginning of the genetic story and what we'll be able to do. So I want to thank both Ann and Eric and we'll follow this story for where we go, both on the consumer end and from the basic research end. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please welcome comedian Tig Notaro and Time Editor-at-Large Belinda Luscombe.
Years ago, after a year, Tig, in which you survived a rare infection, you broke up with your girlfriend, you lost your mother unexpectedly, you opened a comedy set by standing up on stage and saying the words, and I may not get this quite right, but, "Is everyone having a good time? I have cancer." And so I think the question that everybody in this room wants to know about that moment is, what designer were you wearing when you did that? Sorry, that was my Bill Clinton question.
That's all right. I do get asked that all the time. I wear hand-me-downs, so.
An honorable tradition.
Yeah, thank you.
Invasive bilateral breast cancer is not normally something people will joke about. And I wonder if you could explain how the humor helped you deal with it.
Well, it was the final blow. It was a 4-month period of time after I had had pneumonia, C. diff, which was the intestinal disease, and my mother had an accident and died, and the breakup, and I kept thinking that maybe I was cursed. I truly, even though I don't think in those terms, I started to wonder maybe that was something that was real. And then when I went in for my appointment and was diagnosed with invasive cancer, I was truly, it took my breath away in horror and in like, oh my God, this is hilarious. Of course it wasn't hilarious, but I mean, something has to break the tension, and I mean, I was certainly on a roller coaster of emotions for quite a while with everything that had happened, but humor was really a helpful tool to have, which I think I got from my mother and my family and my upbringing, and so I always have felt lucky to have that.
And the reaction of the crowd, it's not exactly a kind of standard opening joke.
No, it's not, and nor was it a joke. I was taking a shower before that show, and I kept thinking, how am I going to open this performance if I really want to talk about everything that I had been going through? And it crossed my mind to walk out on stage and say, hello, good evening, I have cancer. And it made me laugh so hard in the shower that I thought, I bet it'll work when I go on stage live. And it did. The audience broke into laughter, and it was so many different kinds of laughter. It was very like belly laughter, and then nervous laughter, and then there were also people in the audience like, what's happening? So it was all over the place.
Further to that, you had a double mastectomy.
I did.
And then sometimes, including on your HBO special, you took your shirt off during sets. Why did you do that?
Well, after I had had a double mastectomy, I didn't have reconstructive surgery because my chest, if you must know, was not, it wasn't the biggest thing that you could ever see, and to say the least, and it felt odd to me to try and recreate that. So, and then there were moments where I thought maybe I'll go really big, and but anyway, I thought I'd just go with scars, and which is what I did. I just have scars across my chest, and I also thought that was funny to go on stage and take my shirt off and just tell jokes that have nothing to do with cancer or anything, and just talk about air travel. And everybody, a lot of people were like, oh, you shouldn't do that. You're going to lose the audience. They're going to be only focused on your scars. And I thought, I feel like I can pull this off, because to me, the scars, I used to struggle with them, but then I realized one day that they just represented my body healing, and I started to feel empowered by it. And I also just thought that if I'm going to make any sort of statement as a comedian, I should try and add humor to it. And to me, the funny part was not acknowledging it. And I was right. The audience, men, women, cancer survivors, non-cancer survivors, people were always like, I truly got over it so quickly, and it's really just an issue about the human body and just accepting yourself as is. I don't know if I answered your question.
I think you did, yeah.
Okay.
You're not the first person to not answer my question.
Okay.
You're probably not even the first person on stage today
Okay.
to not answer the question. Comedians, it said, will talk about anything, so I feel emboldened to ask, what was your lowest point during that treatment, during those health issues?
During those 4 months?
Yeah, or you could do since. I'm taking any lowest points at this point.
Okay. I've had a lot of low points. I would say, very recently I had spinal fusion about 2.5 months ago, and I had a lot of complications. My intestines shut down and all sorts of stuff happened. And I would have to say, maybe I don't remember, because it's been 7 years since I had cancer and lost my mother and had C. diff and all that, but I feel like possibly my lowest point was maybe a month and a half
Recently.
ago. Yeah, very recent. But I'm coming through all of that now, and I'm very committed to my health, my recovery, and trying not to sit comfortably when my body reaches a point of feeling okay or better, and just remembering I still hopefully have some time to go, and I need to really take care of myself and maintain this.
Are you working on your spinal fusion jokes, or is that just too...
I am. I'm working on my next comedy special that might be called either Spineless or Severed Spine, because my spine has not started fusing yet, so that's a whole other story. But anyway, yeah, of course, we got a new album coming up. To mixed responses. Or, as I like to say, the crowd goes mild. And Robin Roberts told me earlier she stole that line from me about a year ago. So if you hear her say it, she got it from me.
We know where it came from. Is there a point where you get tagged the cancer comedian to speak, and you want to talk about new things? Like, has it been it was what made you famous in a way, but it also does put you in a lane, and I wonder if you ever feel too restricted by that.
Well, I know that I became known when I announced that I had cancer, but I also try to remind myself and other people that I also got known for doing stand-up. I mean, that was what I was doing. And if people see me as a cancer comedian, or that's what they think of for me, that has nothing to do with me or how I see myself. It's certainly been a positive in that people have told me that when they saw my special, when I took my shirt off, or when they listened to my special when I announced that I had cancer, that those things touch them. It can only be a positive thing to me, but I just don't see myself as a cancer comedian. I mean, people could be like, oh, I saw her as the lesbian comedian. I didn't know she had cancer. Or female, you can call me whatever you want, but I just feel like a comedian. So it doesn't, I don't care what you think.
What can people who are well, what's the best thing they can do for people who are like, it must be annoying all the time. People say, how are you? Or how do you think I am? I have cancer, you know. So is there something that you learned from your experience about how the well can help those who have been sick?
I think what I found helpful for me was to not be overrun with, not that positivity is bad. I'm kind of, I'm unusually positive and hopeful, but I think that sometimes when you're in these places of despair and pain, sometimes you need to be able to speak in a, I found that I needed to be able to speak in that space of I'm in pain and I am scared and I don't know what to do, and for people to be able to sit in that moment with somebody and accept that and not try and suffocate them with, you're going to be okay, and the medicine has come so far and everything, and it's like, I know, I know, but I really feel this particular way right now, and I just want to share that. And I feel like that was helpful for me when people would allow me to be there.
You're now married, I think, or in a long-term relationship, and you have 3.5-year-old twins.
Yes, I am married.
Is that like giving your house a deadly disease, having 3.5-year-old twins running around?
It's yes, actually. My wife and I, before the boys came along, it was maybe a week or two before they were born, and she walked past me and I was sitting on the couch, and I said, she said to me, do you know anything about raising kids? I said, no, do you? It hadn't come up until now. But it has been quite a challenge, I'll say that. It's not, I can't pretend like, it's been this perfect ride and perfect family. It's like, oh my God, we have these two people that moved in with us 3.5 years ago, and they are insane, and we are now insane. But they just started preschool a couple of weeks ago, and so that it's, there's hope on the horizon.
Tig Notaro, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from the break. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves and enjoying the summit and our wonderful speakers. I just want to let you know we're almost there. I don't want this day to end, and I'm sure you don't either, but unfortunately we'll have to at some point. I just want to remind you to please stay with us and join us for a reception after 4, immediately after the summit. Absolutely. Thank you, David. I forgot that part. And now I want to just first of all thank Notaro for giving us a very different perspective on health and illness, and she has such a wonderful way of healing through humor. We want to continue to ask you to think that way, and this time through the eyes of artist Prune Nori. Please direct your attention to the screens for a brief video clip from her latest documentary, Serendipity.
If you had a secret power, what would it be? Healing with my hands. I love anatomy. My way of expression is sculpture, focusing on fertility. That's part of me. I was working a lot about the body, but I think I lost my body on the way. I got a call. It was my doctor. She told me that I had breast cancer. You have to freeze your eggs. It has so many links to past projects. Je une femme avec les cheveux courts et moins de seins.
Mais quelle idée dire ça?
Mais c'est vous le sculpteur aujourd'hui.
Vous pouvez signer là aussi.
When you heal, you realize that health is everything. If you're in good health, there is no limit. I learned how to work in a different way. Once you accept, it makes things easier. It brings you to the essential. Health and love and art.
We are thrilled to have Prune with us today to answer a few questions for us. Prune?
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here with us. I want to start out by asking you, how is your health today? How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. I could have slept a bit more hours, but I'm great. What about you?
All of us. I could have too. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about your latest work, The Amazon, which hopefully we'll have up on the screen shortly. This is really an expression of the journey, your breast cancer journey that you're going through right now. In your film, there's a moment where you talk about the first time after surgery, you're in your hospital room, you walk into your bathroom and you see yourself in the mirror. and you got very emotional about what you saw and what it meant to you. How did you get from there to creating the Amazon?
I think I needed proaction. As a sculptor, I felt through reconstruction that I was becoming the sculpture. And that sculpture, the Amazon, was a way for me to get back to being the sculptor. I was feeling a bit, like a patient. You have to be patient. Even when you can walk to the surgical room, they're gonna roll you on a gurney. And I needed that proaction. The movie helped me to do that by, saying action to myself in the corridors of the hospital. I was getting back into the choice of my life. But the sculpture, I think, was a very important key moment for me because it became my catharsis. That rite of passage, and I think rituals are important when you're ill to celebrate every different steps. And at the end of the treatments, I decided to create this sculpture, like a celebration.
Why an Amazon?
So Amazons are a tribe of women that are warriors. And the mythology says that they were cutting their breasts to be better with their bow and arrow. And I decided to do my own. I felt in love with one I saw at the Met, a life size, and I did my own version of it. And the idea was to transport it like a journey, like to symbolize the cancer journey on the river, the Hudson River, which I did on a barge, that was my dream, until a place where I invited all my family and friends to come for a celebration, a performance where I cut her breasts to symbolize the fact I was becoming a sculptor again. And also, I asked all my family to light. She's recovered of incense sticks. We don't see it here, but half of her body is recovered of incense sticks, like acupuncture needles, that technique was a real pillar for me throughout the treatment. Because, for example, as a patient, you have so many side effects when you go through chemo. And if you use acupuncture at the end of your fingers, you protect your nerves. And as a sculptor, I didn't want to lose the sensation at the end of my fingers. So acupuncture really helped me. And I decided to recover that sculpture with thousands of incense sticks symbolizing acupuncture needles. And all my family and friends littered all of them.
One of the themes in your documentary is about how your life seemed to imitate your art. You had an interest in anatomy and an interest in acupuncture well before your diagnosis. How did you see all of that coming full circle, and then, as you said, through the Amazon, having your art then be your catharsis for what you were going through with your breast cancer?
I didn't know I would do a movie about it, in a way. It was very hard to me to decide to turn the camera towards myself, because until then, there were kind of a distance with all my projects. I was working, I thought, like a kind of anthropologist. And suddenly, it's like life had pointed its fingers to the inside of my body to tell me, okay, now this is where you should look. So I did the movie for that, but also because going through the treatments, it was incredible. So many serendipity, so many crazy links with all the past projects I had done before. To give you an example, one of my first sculptures was a breast udder. Then, during a performance called the Procreative Dinner between art, science, and gastronomy, where I follow all the steps of assisted procreation from the sperm bar to the delivery of the baby, which is a reflection on eugenism, on designer babies, the new technologies today to create your own type of baby. So, I, at the end of the dinner, served my breast. I molded my nipple at the time and served it in almond paste without knowing that one day I would still have the mold, but I won't have the nipple anymore.
Wow.
And another thing, for example, is that at the end of reconstruction, I have my surgeon who comes to me, where I worked 10 years ago in India to do sculptures, hybrid between the holy cow, Indian holy cow, and the daughter, to highlight the issue, the paradox that holy cow are sacred because they are a symbol of fertility, but no one wants the girl, even if they are a vector of fertility and will be mothers one day. So I did hybrids between both, that I put in the street, abandoned in the street, and I documented people's reaction. I even did a giant one that I pushed back into the river Genji. And suddenly, I'm in front of my surgeon, and he's telling me, oh, by the way, we have that new technique that I want to propose you. I think it would be great for you. So it's to graft some cow fetus skin on your breast. So he was right away proposing me, to make me the hybrid, suddenly. So I said no.
And now we can see why you called your film Serendipity. The Amazon, of course, is a warrior. What message do you hope that she has for other women like yourself who've been diagnosed with breast cancer?
So another serendipity is like, I made 108 warriors before knowing that I would become one. Because I created, like a year before the Amazon and a year before my cancer, a giant army in China that I buried in a secret place until 2030. I will dig it up with archaeologists. There are 108 life-size sculptures of little girls mixed with the soldiers, the 1,000-year-old soldiers. And suddenly, I buried them in China, thinking I'm going to dig them up in 2030, and I hear about my cancer, and I'm confronted to my own death, and I'm thinking, will I be there in 2030? So I become that warrior. I decide to create the Amazon warrior, to give it to all women warrior, in that hope that at some point that sculpture will go in a hospital or an institution, and that woman will be able to come and light the incense as a symbolic and as a cathartic gesture for themselves, like it was for me.
Prune, thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Thank you, Alice.
Sharing your vision. And I encourage everyone, if you have a chance, to see her documentary, Serendipity, which launches tomorrow here in New York.
Tomorrow at the Quad Theater in New York, and in LA, and San Francisco, etc.
Excellent. I would highly encourage you to see it. Thank you, Prune.
Thank you, Alice. Thank you, everyone.
It's now my privilege to introduce the next session, Digitizing Wellness. And who else could we have but CEO, President, and co-founder of Fitbit, James Park, with MSNBC anchor Stephanie Rule. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me. After a very hectic news day, I'm really glad to talk fitness and health and wellness. James, thank you. I think when people think Fitbit, sort of the original wearable, but our default is Fitbit, the thing on your wrist, how many steps did you get in today? That was where Fitbit was 12 years ago. 6 years ago, it was everybody's getting Fitbits for one another for Christmas. Everybody has it on January 1st. March 1st, a few less people have it on. And today, Fitbit is so much more. It's so much more than your steps. Tell us where you think you are.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we started. Where we've gone over the past few years is that we've seen much more of our company shifting to how we can change people's behavior around health. How do we get people to be more active, sleep better, eat better, be more mindful? And then also more increasingly, we've been helping people manage more serious chronic disease conditions. So like diabetes, hypertension, sleep disorders, heart health. And again, we're trying to transform ourselves into becoming a behavior change company to help people manage these more serious disease conditions, and then ultimately for the healthcare system, help address rising costs as well. And I think the amazing thing for me is to have witnessed this transformation over the past 12 years. And I'm excited to work with over 1,500 companies at this point who are trying to get their employees healthier and lower their healthcare costs. We work with over 100 health plans, including United Healthcare, Humana, a lot of the regional blues. We're a free covered benefit in 59 Medicare Advantage plans right now.
How? I don't think people understand this portion of your business because there's a universe of people in the fitness lane. But in terms of wellness, it encompasses all of us and our children and our parents. So when you say you're working with all these healthcare companies, exactly how?
It's kind of interesting because when we first started the company, I think some of the very early questions was, have you thought about working with insurance companies? It's like, we have, but it's not the most easiest thing to do. So it's taken a really long while, and I think what's really changed over the past few years is the realization that we've collected all this data, and being able to do sophisticated analytics, data science on all this data we've collected, billions of nights of sleep, hundreds of billions of nights of, minutes of heart rate data. When you can run sophisticated data science on it, you can actually understand, one, how to influence people's behavior, and then two, you can realize, exactly what the cost savings can come out of that. And I think we're starting to unlock that, and that's what's sparking a lot of interest from employers, health plans, governments. We just announced something with the government of Singapore where Fitbits will be made available free to 20% of their population. And that's with the understanding that wearing these devices and understanding the data behind it can have profound impacts on people's health.
You created connected health, but what's been born in the last few years is the rise of the need to disconnect. So how do you address that? You've sold 100 million Fitbits. You have 30 million active users. That leaves 70 million Fitbits sitting in bedside tables with people going, it gives me too much anxiety. I don't want to hear how much I slept last night because I know it's a bad number, and maybe I'm going to lay on my couch and binge watch TV, and they're saying, I reject being monitored all the time.
Yeah, so I think the most powerful thing about Fitbit, and that's actually how we started the company, is I think we've tried to make this whole experience very approachable, fun, welcoming, accessible. In fact, the origin of the company stems from gaming. Back when I started the company, I actually had time to play a lot of video games. I was really excited about the Nintendo Wii when it came out.
What was your favorite game?
Mario Party, Mario Kart, Wii Fit. At the time, Wii Fit was a big one.
There's always a window into who someone is.
I'm more of a Nintendo person than Xbox or PS4, but I think Nintendo's the same approach where they try to make gaming into something that's positive, more family-oriented, et cetera. But when Nintendo came out and they had motion sensors and it was tied to like Wii Fit and activity, it made gaming into something that was active, fun, positive for the whole family. And my co-founder and I thought, how do we capture that magic and put it into a more portable form that's with you 24/7? And I think that DNA has been with us. Healthcare can be something that's very intimidating, scary, something that you don't want to deal with, and we wanted to take the opposite approach, and that I think contributed a lot to the growth of the company. And the other thing too is, this relates to your first question, over time we've been trying to transform what we do from what people consider to be just like a really great nice to have into a critical must-have. And I think that comes with our expansion into healthcare. If we can help people manage more serious conditions like diabetes, hypertension, we today just announced that we're working with two of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world in the BMS Pfizer alliance to help raise awareness, improve detection, and the whole health care pathway around Afib, which is a pretty serious disease condition. We're in clinical trials around detecting sleep apnea. The more of these use cases that we can have, we think we can transform the idea of what we're doing from a nice to have to a must have. If you can wear a device that can literally save your life, why wouldn't everyone in the world wear one?
Are senior citizens a growth area for you? We know that the connected home has changed so many people's lives who can extend the amount of time they're living on their own. And they can have an adult child monitoring them and checking in. Is this an area for you to monitor a portion of our population that needs to be monitored but doesn't necessarily need full-time care, which is a huge drain on people's financial situation?
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity, but I wouldn't characterize as monitoring. I think no one really wants to be monitored, particularly people as they age and get older. When we talk to people who are in their 60s, 70s, they really want to maintain an independent, active, and healthy lifestyle. So that's the way we would approach it. And we already have millions of people in their 60s and 70s today using Fitbits around the world, and we're trying to make that even more pervasive. As I mentioned before, we're a free benefit in 59 Medicare Advantage plans, which is a pretty huge deal. If you're a senior in one of these plans, you get a Fitbit for free.
What are you wearing?
I'm wearing Versa 2, which is our latest smartwatch. I think I have a pretty healthy routine. I think what I'm trying to work on right now is my sleep, which is terrible. Yeah, like many people in this room probably. we like.
Help us understand the Fitbit family. What I'm guessing is your ideal.
Yeah, so we really encourage the idea of communities of people, particularly the family, to be really engaged in their health. A couple years ago, we launched ACE, which is our kids' fitness tracking device, because we saw kids' health and especially the problem of childhood obesity to be a huge issue. But again, that's a pretty sensitive topic for families. So again, we tried to take an approach that was much more fun, inclusive, approachable, and welcoming. We've seen huge adoption of kids using Fitbits, which I think is incredibly positive. And what we've seen is that when people engage in their health in the community, the overall community benefits. So we have a lot of games and challenges that you can use on Fitbit. People who participate in a game or challenge end up just on activity walking 2,000 more steps per day, which is pretty profound. That's an extra mile per day. And every friend that you add adds a few hundred more steps, up to a certain point. You can't just add like 10,000 friends randomly and then suddenly become healthy. That'd be great, but that's just not how the way it works.
You were the first to this party. The Fitbit is, when we think connected fitness, connected health, you were the one to do it. But then over the last 12 years, you've experienced when other people show up to the party, whether it's Apple or any number of other companies or platforms. 12 years in, how do you continue to be the first in, the innovator, but not get your jam stolen?
For us, I think it's part of this whole transformation from being a pure device company to one that's highly focused on health, and then not just focused on the technology, but everything that comes around a holistic health outlook. So one of the exciting things about working with BMS Pfizer is around Afib detection. Some technology companies might just focus on the technology of how we detect Afib, but it goes well beyond that. If you just get an alert, what do you do with that? Should I be alarmed? Should I be concerned? Should I freak out? What do I tell my doctor? How do I have a productive conversation? So for us, it's thinking about beyond just the alert. How do we educate people about specific conditions as they get older or become more at risk? What should someone do when they get an alert about whether it's Afib or apnea? How do we create analytics, insights, reports that you can take to your physician so you have a productive dialogue and the physician just doesn't shut down because they think it's something like WebMD, where they go, oh, I don't know where that's coming from. So we have to build credibility with the physician as well. And then ultimately, we think about treatment, how do we manage people through that? Is it a lifestyle change? Is it something else? So I think the whole care pathway around all these disease conditions is something that's very difficult and needs a lot of thought put into it. And that's what we're focused on. It's just beyond the tech, which I think a lot of our competitors are narrowly trying to do.
What's something about this company that you love that we don't know about?
One, the reason I'm excited to come into work every day, even though it's been over 12 years, three interesting years as a public company or so, is just the fact that unlike a lot of tech companies where they apply a lot of data science, they're nudging people, but they're nudging people to do things that might not be in their best interest.
What do you mean? I don't know.
Clicking ads, doing other things. For us, what's amazing is when we look at the data, we make changes to our software. We can see in real time that we're actually getting people to do different things that are beneficial to them, getting more activity, sleeping better. People who use a Fitbit and start off end up getting 15 minutes more of sleep, and that's through all of the behavior change things that we're doing. And our team gets super excited when they say, oh my God, we added another minute. That's amazing. So I think everyone at the company is super mission driven. I think we have a lot of elements in the culture. We have Workout Wednesdays where we have a lot of employees who lead fitness classes, and it's a pretty casual dress environment as well, so that all fits. I think that's what gets me excited every day about coming into work.
What kind of testimonials do you get from users, from customers?
Well, we saw one example on stage today with President Clinton, which was great. That was really appreciate that. Also, President Obama's an avid user of the Fitbit for the past few years.
Those are famous ones.
No, so one of the things that we do is when we have all hands, and actually every Friday, we carefully select customer stories that really represent how we're helping people around the world. It could be that people have lost weight, or we could have detected a serious disease condition like their heart rate's in a weird state and they go to their physician, et cetera. And for us, it really reminds us that what we're doing is still very early, but it can have a really profound impact on individual people, society, and it's what drives us every day to work harder.
When you look at all the data you collect, and I'm not asking you to share anything proprietary or individual, what does it tell you about our health right now? What does it tell you about our wellness? Because people feel exhausted. People feel like their anxiety is mounting higher than ever. But those are people who talk a lot. You actually see all these numbers. How healthy are we, or unhealthy?
I think one of the challenges is we're not as healthy as we should be. I think the anxiety issue is probably dependent on where you live and who you are and your income level. I think for many people, it's just a little bit more pragmatic. They want to get a little bit more active. Like our population right now, the Fitbit is not what people might think it is. It's not a super fit population. It's not what we call worried well. This is a population that's looking for a combination of technology, fun, engagement, community to just really change their life. And we're trying to help them. So that's the way I look at it.
How affordable do you want to be? Obviously, you're a publicly traded company, and we understand the pressures that go with that. But you want to change the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. In terms of where you see yourself as a product, mass market, aspirational, where are you?
I think we're well on our way to, not just us, but our whole industry. Again, well on this way of becoming a critical must-have, like similar to the way that you wouldn't buy a car without a seatbelt or airbag. I think that's where we want to go. And we really are focused on making this accessible and available to as many people as possible. You shouldn't be someone who has to be able to afford to pay hundreds of dollars to be able to get the benefits. And that's why we're heavily focused on working with employers who fully subsidize a lot of our devices for their employees. We work with a lot of health plans who are making this freely available. And with the Singapore announcement, even with nation states who are making this available to their citizens. And especially with Singapore, we want to make that a model for a lot of different governments around the world.
How much harder is it? Is it harder for you to be innovative now that you're a publicly traded company, given the pressures?
I think one of the things that I find really exciting in this field, there's so many ideas. I actually think being public helps us focus, so it's actually a benefit, because I think one of the problems with startups is that there's so many different things that you could chase. So I like to look at the silver lining of being a public company, where we try to identify the biggest and most beneficial things that we do and focus on a few of those.
Today, this audience is getting to hear from, see extraordinary things. What do you want the one thing we take away from this conversation about Fitbit?
I think for me, it's really to have an open mind, and that's with people. If you're a patient, if you're a user, if you're a physician, if you're an insurance company exec, if you're a member of government, just be open to the fact that this is something that's new. It's coming. The ability to have millions of people who are wearing these devices, who are motivated by themselves to take control of their own health. And how do we help them help themselves?
Well, in a world with lots of negative influences, we are grateful that you are here trying to make us smarter, better, and healthier. Thank you, James.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Time.
Closing the healthcare gap. Please welcome co-founder and CEO of Last Mile Health, Dr. Raj Punjabi, and Times Nation editor Haley Sweetland Edwards.
Hi, Dr. Punjabi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's good to be here.
We have people in this crowd who have expertise in all kinds of health, as we know, everything from Fitbit to DNA. So let's start with the basics with you. What is Last Mile Health and how did you get there?
Well,
Last Mile Health's focused on this critical challenge. We've talked a lot today about innovations in medicine, and a lot of what we focus on is how those innovations get to the people that need them. And when we, my journey to this actually was quite personal. My grandparents were refugees of the India-Pakistan partition, and my parents then migrated later to West Africa, to Liberia, which is where I was born. And when I was 9, a civil war erupted in the country. We were refugees, ended up resettling in North Carolina. And when I went to medical school, I had a chance to go back to serve the people we'd left behind. And when I got home about 15 years ago, what I found was a huge doctor shortage. We had, just 50 doctors left for a country of about 4 million people. To put that in perspective, it'd be like the city of San Francisco having just 8 doctors to serve the entire city. So you can imagine, as I was seeing, if you fell sick in the city where the doctors were, the few that remained, you might stand a chance. Right. But if you fell sick in remote rural communities where I'd been asked to serve alongside my colleagues, we were seeing people die from conditions no one should die from. Complications of childbirth, malaria, HIV, no one should die from in the 21st century, right? And so this basic idea that illness is universal and healthcare is not, we know that to be true instinctively, really struck home when you look at these isolated rural communities that might be hours to days away from the very innovations we've been talking about here on this stage. Mm-hmm. And you reflect that this is not just one story in one country, but in fact a global crisis, then we wanted to act to try to address that issue.
Right, and the cornerstone of what Last Mile Health does, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is facilitate the access of community health workers.
Right.
And talk a little bit about who those people are.
Yeah. So, we know that about half the world lacks access to healthcare altogether. It's important to understand the problem as well, right? And we're talking about basic healthcare like vaccinations. An innovation been around for decades, but 13 million kids this year will go without even a single dose of one vaccine, and most of these kids are living in rural communities, be it in Africa, Asia, and some of them here in the United States, by the way. So the answer to this is you first have to deal with the health worker shortage, because that's a critical issue. It turns out we have the most massive health worker shortage now in history. That's projected to grow to an 18 million health worker shortfall by 2030 if nothing differently is done. And the conventional approach, and a Harvard Medical School professor like myself, this might sound heretic, but it ain't just doctors, it turns out. Doctors training more of them is important, but it's not sufficient. Most of healthcare is organized in a way that doctors do most of the prescribing and the power of diagnosing disease. And problem is, most of us are concentrated in cities, as I said, leaving rural communities behind. So we've said, what if you could reorganize the healthcare system? What if you could actually empower nurses to do more? What if you could even go further than that? What if you could employ local rural people or community members even here in cities to be part of the healthcare team, even people without a high school degree? And so that's what we do at Last Mile Health, is we train community health workers. I'll just give you an example of one, so for those who may not be familiar with the concept. But take one I just worked with a few months ago named Ruth Tarr. So Ruth lives in a village that's about 6 hours from the nearest clinic in the rainforest of Liberia. Had to drop out of school when she was in the 6th grade because her parents couldn't afford school fees. She didn't have a job until about 3 years ago, when, as part of a national program the Liberian government's put together, our organization, Last Mile Health, and the government trained her, has her coached by a nurse. She's learned the 30 most essential medical skills, and because of the revolutions that some of your companies are making in biotechnology, this is a $1 rapid test kit for HIV. There's similar ones for malaria that Ruth has been trained on. She can put that in a backpack alongside a smartphone that teaches her how to look for kids with malaria or HIV or treat malnutrition. So we've been trying to scale this up. Now when a parent is worried her child is sick with pneumonia, as my child was this past week in Boston, she can get a community health worker like Ruth, her neighbor, to come to the doorstep with modern medicine and her smartphone, provide care on the spot.
Amazing. So how how many hours does it take to train someone like Ruth, and how much does that cost?
So the programs range. In Liberia, it's about 16 weeks. In the state of Alaska, with the community health aid program there, the Alaska Native Health Service runs, where I first learned about this model. They do it in about 16 to 32 weeks, and they work at almost the level of a nurse. And they've covered 20% land mass equivalent of the U.S. with a worker in every village in the tundra in Alaska. And they're doing things like dentistry to, screening people for heart attacks.
So that sounds like this isn't only something that we can do out of the goodness of our hearts, but this is something that makes economic sense.
It does. I mean, the data is striking. So when you think about community health workers, this is a rapid way to create jobs. The health sector, as many of you know, actually withstood the 2008-9 economic recession. Health sector jobs kept growing, and this is a very fast way to create those jobs in underserved areas. It turns out for every dollar a country invests or a health system invests in a community health worker, paying them, supervising them, equipping them, you get $10 of return to society. That's jobs created, longer life years, and epidemics averted. One of the things I'm most proud about what Time's done. We see a lot of covers on innovations and advances in medicine. A few years ago, you also ran a cover story on Ebola fighters on the front lines in the West Africa crisis. Really hits home now because there are our colleagues in the Democratic Republic of Congo who are fighting on the front lines. Well, those are these community and frontline health workers. And that was a crisis in Liberia and West Africa that cost our economies about $50 billion when you add it all up. So for tens of millions of dollars, or for a couple of $1,000s a year, you could hire, train, and equip a Ruth to help identify these epidemics early on. And so countries, let me just say, a lot of us are interested in outcomes as well. This is not a poorer version of healthcare. When you look at studies in Liberia, you see that 1 out of 3 malaria patients are being tested and treated by these workers. When you look in Ethiopia, these workers have helped reduce under 5 child mortality by 60%. When you look here in the United States, right here in Harlem, there are groups that are working on improving access to care for patients with diabetes, reducing hospitalization rates. And as I mentioned, in the state of Alaska, they've scaled up a tremendous amount of services. So this approach of radical task shifting to community health workers, and let me say one level up to nurses and midwives, is important.
Incredible. More Ruths. We need more Ruths in the world. So just one more question. If this is such a good idea, it is economic, it has an impact, why hasn't this caught fire? What's the power dynamic?
Well, there is a huge, not everybody agrees with this approach. And sometimes it's those in my profession, the Doctors Guild, that get in the way. I was, if you look at, I'll give you one quick example. In the state of Alaska, the Alaskans helped train community health workers out in the tundra to do microdentistry. So they fill cavities in those areas. These are 6th to 10th grade educated folks who take a 16 to 32 week training, and they get a little extra training. Well, they were sued for doing that a few years ago by the American Dentistry Association, claiming that these workers were providing unsafe and ineffective care. Well, as in any trial, they presented the evidence that in fact the care was better, and they used telemedicine to ensure dentists were supervising remotely. And the Alaskans won their case. But the issue here is that the male-dominated professions are under-recognizing and undervaluing frontline caregivers, be they nurses, midwives, or community health workers. It turns out the math on this is pretty striking. This year, the World Health Organization released a report that said, if you count up the unpaid and underpaid work of community and frontline health workers around the world, most of whom are poor, most of whom are women, and most of them are still unpaid. It turns out that it's $1 trillion. The poorest women on earth subsidize healthcare globally to the tune of $1 trillion with their unpaid and underpaid work. That's larger than the economies of over 150 countries. That's what $1 trillion means. So when you ask why that is, it does come down to this guild mentality that we have to break in healthcare. If we really want to democratize healthcare, if we want healthcare for all within reach of every last one of us, it turns out we need to help others partake in the work of healthcare. And so, again, with the technology that's new, if we can reshape our policies, if we can hire more of these workers, if we can advance what nurses and midwives do, as well as community health workers, I think we can get very far. And just last month, there's been some momentum around this. 190 governments came together not far from here at the UN General Assembly and made the first declaration on universal health coverage. And as part of that, they said they want to feature community health workers as part of a core part of their plans. Now, declarations are great, but it's not enough. Never in history has power been easily granted by those who have it. It has to be demanded by those from whom it's been taken. So
and
I think that's the key thing that we all have to do now, is really ask ourselves, if as a doctor I've never gone unpaid for my work, why aren't community health workers and nurses given the same recognition to get paid for this?
Unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. Thank you so much, Dr. Bendabi.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We're almost there. You have made it, and thank you so much for sticking with us. We really, really appreciate it. I think you'll be very happy that you did, because we have a very special session planned for you. I would like to introduce Dr. Francis Collins, Director of the National Institutes of Health.
Thank you.
Dr. Laura Esserman, Professor of Surgery at UCSF School of Medicine. And Sean Parker, entrepreneur, founder, the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy.
All right. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Sean, you can take a little breather, catch your breath. He was a victim of our wonderful New York traffic.
I actually have a broken foot, so I'm moving very slowly.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. Sean, actually, sorry to put you on the spot here, but I wanted to start with you, because you came to medicine as an outsider, someone who wasn't completely raised and familiar with all the ins and outs of the way research and medicine and new treatments are developed. So tell me, when you looked at the system from where you were standing, what were the major choke points and kind of barriers that you saw immediately in your eye as someone coming from the outside that could immediately be addressed?
Well, I mean, me coming to something as an outsider is not that unusual. I came to the music industry when I was 19 years old as an outsider. Hopefully this will turn out better than that did. Yeah. But so I mean, from my perspective, going into an industry where there are some similarities to what I'm used to, coming from computer science and engineering, and a huge number of differences in the way people compensated, differences in the way people think about the problems, regulatory hurdles that when, if you know anything about the internet and watch the debates, you'll realize that these companies operated in a largely unregulated environment for a very long time. That breeds a very different mindset. So, the challenge for me, like when I went back into the music industry with Spotify, what was specifically to do something different. And coming into, getting more and more involved in life sciences, in particular immuno-oncology over the last 10 or 15 years, hasn't really been that much different than adapting to the strange politics and interesting, kind of interesting quirks and inherent difficulties of a complex industry like biotech. So and life sciences and healthcare. I think that the reason, I think what you're getting at is that the reason that I became so interested in this field when I did was, number one, it seemed like there was tremendous opportunity, that the field looked and felt a lot like the early internet when I was, an outsider to the world of starting companies and the world of venture capital and the world of business. There was a lot of similarity in terms of level of enthusiasm, excitement, and a series of breakthroughs that people on the stage have been very much responsible for, which were speeding up the rate of progress. And yet there were these inherent systemic obstacles that felt like they were slowing down progress. And so we set out to examine what are some of those obstacles. Like we talk a lot about collaboration. It's very easy to talk about collaboration. It's really hard to do. So how do you remove the IP obstacles that would create bureaucratic encumbrances so that companies can't work with other companies or academic centers can't work easily without other academic centers? How do you remove a very simple obstacle like the difficulty in accruing patients to a clinical trial? So if 80% of all clinical trials go completely unfilled, that's a crazy number. And the cost of enrollment in these trials, what medical centers are charging for enrollment, can be extraordinarily high. I mean, one of our hospitals, I won't say which, their median enrollment price for a patient is over $30,000. That's just a fee they tack on for accrual of a patient. So if we could open what's called an IRB at 7 centers simultaneously, and they had, because we had a common IRB, that would allow us to accrue patients much more quickly. And likewise with intellectual property, if we could be stewards of the intellectual property that was coming out of the research so that we could ensure that it made its way into companies, so that it made its way into whether those are small biotech companies where we help them raise money or partnerships with large pharmaceutical companies. We're there to act as stewards to make sure that really great ideas, really great technology doesn't get lost, into the valley of death, so to speak.
Dr. Collins, you oversee a $39 billion research budget, the largest in the United States for biomedical research, for basically creating that foundation, from which entrepreneurs and doctors and researchers can build upon. When you now look at the landscape for how we move forward to improve and accelerate the way we develop drugs, do you see a way forward in having both public and private entities collaborate in a more meaningful way?
I certainly do, and I think actually scientifically right now we're at an exceptionally opportune moment to try to build on that. Let's be clear that I think the ecosystem, as we like to call it, between public and private in biomedical research has been the reason of the success of the American enterprise for a few decades, where public funding of basic science, making discoveries that lead to the idea about new drug targets, carrying those a certain distance and then having those licensed out and picked up by industry. That's been the reason why America has led this effort. But it can be clunky and things can get in the way, and everything we can do to try to nurture and encourage the success of that ecosystem is worthwhile. Sean has been such an important leader in the area of cancer, and particularly cancer immunotherapy. Let me just give an example of something that we've now tried to do to enhance that process. Everybody's excited about cancer immunotherapy, and we should be, given the way in which this has brought a fourth entity to the treatment of cancer that we didn't have before. We had surgery, we had radiation, we had chemotherapy. Now we've got immunotherapy, and it is saving lives of people with metastatic disease. Not enough yet, because solid tumors are still not yielding up to us the way we think they could, and Carl June, I'm sure, talked about that this morning. But everybody wants to see that success go forward. That means industry's running trials. The National Cancer Institute at NIH is running trials. Everybody wants to find out what were the indications that said this was going to work when it works, and when it doesn't, why didn't it? Which means you need a public-private partnership. So the Partnership for Advancing Cancer Therapies, PACT, has 12 pharmaceutical companies and a whole bunch of academics supported by NIH. And we've agreed that every clinical trial is going to get the same highly standardized biomarkers that will indicate whether or not a particular immunotherapy is working. And that had enormous enthusiasm behind it. It's all open access, it's pre-competitive, and it's a way to make our ecosystem work better. And we're always looking for ways to do that. And I think there's a lot of receptivity in both sectors to see that happen.
Yeah, and Sean, you've talked a lot too about not repeating experiments, you know, and having, wasting a lot of resources and funding and time in doing things in the same thing in several different institutes. So talk a little bit about the way that you see forward in being able to streamline that and to be a little more efficient, as Dr. Collins was mentioning.
Well, I mean, that's certainly one side of efficiency. I mean, we do want to see, repeatability. It's very important that the same science is repeated in multiple institutions. What's concerning is, and what I found only really through my insider role, helping to coordinate these institutions and the science that's getting done, was that a lot of science, the result wasn't worth publishing. It wasn't the result they were expecting. It didn't lead to a publication. It was tried. You could argue there were methodological problems that could be fixed. It could be tried again. But what that's allowed us to do in a lot of cases, very informally, is to move information around, between researchers and say, well, so and so over here already tried something like that, and we didn't get the result exactly that we had in mind, and maybe you should, if you try that or try that plus a couple other things that could work. That definitely, so much of what we do, because Francis has the largest budget in the world for health research, and we're a tiny little nonprofit. So where do we fit into this?
That tiny now.
Well, we're getting bigger. We're getting bigger. 400 researchers now, so it's not really, it's a lot bigger than it was when we started 3 years ago. So look, as a tiny nonprofit, we have to figure out where do we fit into this picture. What's the critical choke points in the system where we can unlock value, and a lot of that is just this. Whereas the NIH is instrumental to basic science and translational medicine, but doing a lot of the basic science that leads to discoveries, we try to be very focused and disciplined around translational medicine. So if we're going to back a project, whether there's basic science involved or not, it has to be part of a path that we see from where that particular investment could lead to either a drug or a combination or some other therapeutic modality that we believe has a high probability of not only getting FDA approved, but really radically changing patient outcomes. We're not interested in going after the low-hanging fruit of, like, in cell therapy, yet another hematologic liquid tumor, CAR T cell against CD19 or BCMA or something like that. We're interested in solid tumors in particular. We're interested in these really hard, big problems, which are really the big killers in cancer, the common epithelial tumors, and it takes an approach or a willingness to take these big bets that I think a pure academic, if I were worried about how often I were getting published and how often I were getting grants from you guys, then I wouldn't be able to reallocate resources quickly behind the things that I felt were really likely to work.
Yeah.
So can I say, we actually have run an experiment to show that it's possible. You can solve the unsolvable by changing the way you do business. There are a couple of things that need to change. We need to change the way we do care, and I think part of the paradigm is this idea of testing all these drugs in late-stage disease is a real problem, because the best way to cure metastatic disease is to prevent it. And the I-SPY trial is an experiment that's been running now for 10 years, okay, with 22 academic partners now.
Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so this was originally started by the NIH Foundation. It's now run by a 501c3 foundation called Quantum Leap Healthcare Foundation, Healthcare Collaborative. But this is the idea for women with larger breast cancers, more aggressive breast cancer, that we want to take the standard of care and something else. How can we get them to a better place? The first thing you have to think about is there an early endpoint? The reason we are where we are in a lot of cancers is because the surgeons would, and I'm a surgeon, surgeons would operate on people, and then people would give them chemotherapy or what we call adjuvant therapy, and you'd hope for the best and wait. That is not a good way to go because you have no idea who's responding. And then at the end of the day, you see everybody getting drug B, and it's a tiny bit better. These Kaplan-Meier curves, so the drug A is here and drug B is here. You run thousands of patients, but that means some group of people are getting a good big benefit, but who? And most of them are not. So what we decided is the truth is for all these diseases, no one cancer, they're not the same disease. Breast cancer is many diseases. So we explicitly said we're going to focus on that group that has a very fast growth rate. And I know as a surgeon, if someone's at risk to have that disease spread outside their body, I am not going to cure them with surgery. So the good thing is you can reverse the order of therapy and it doesn't change their outcome. But then by the time five months goes by, I have an early indicator. And we've now proven that we've put our 19th drug into the trial. One protocol. The drugs come in and out. We can adaptively randomize. We've run the trial where the trial is smart enough to assign the next patient a drug that's working better. But here's the dilemma we're in.
So you learn as you go.
We learn as we go. But now, and people said it couldn't be done. We have 15 companies that have put things in. This was one of the first trials where people said they'd put that together. That's moving on. We should all learn from each other. But here's now another really important thing. We have found that if you, and people said, oh, no, people aren't going to work together. They will work together. You just have to change the way you give credit. And the thing is, we're all in it, really, at the end of the day, for our patients. And so we want to get people to a better outcome. And what we've shown is that early response, if the tumor goes away before surgery, their chance of survival is 95%, not 60%. So what happens if you're that patient and you didn't get that good response? What do you want? You want more. You want something else. And if you got a good response, you don't need everything. Here's the other problem, is that everyone just gives the whole kitchen sink. And patients care about getting better, but they also care about toxicity. If you cure them, they also have to live 20 years with the collateral damage of treatment. So the truth is that now what we need to do is adapt within patients. And people say, well, that's not scientific. I said, well, then our science has to change, right, to make it patient-centered. And, this idea of a control. Well, if the control isn't as good, why are we doing that? It's not about drug A versus B. That's the old way we've done it, and that's how you get your regulatory path. But why can't we get a regulatory path that says, if you can get this patient to a complete response in a less toxic way, you get approval for that. And and the way you can run a trial is you give the least toxic. So once something new has happened, we've actually shown these immunotherapies, which don't work that well in metastatic disease, triple the chance that the tumor will go away in the early setting. And now Merck has now done a confirmatory trial. This was a 15-year process down to 5 years, right? So this is super cool, right? This is proof. This is just an example of the kind of thing this is the way all our trials should be done. But the next thing is, no one's going to try anything new, but there's lots more work to be done. Everything's still very toxic. If you get something and you're a great responder, you can go to the OR and you can skip the rest of that stuff as long as you're measuring it, right? We need precision analytics for trials, but we also need it for our care process, right? And so least toxic, then you get rescued by the next best thing for your subtype. And if that doesn't work, then bring in the stuff that Carl June's working on or something that's going to target it or some other way to do it.
But I have to say that I've talked to many of your patients, and you're a breast cancer surgeon, so you would think, you come in, you're a high risk, you're a woman with high risk of breast cancer, consider mastectomy, consider lumpectomy, surgery. But they've told me that when they come in to see you, you often ask them, what do I do with you? And by that, not that you don't know what to do with them, but what do we do to treat your cancer? You know, your genetics, your situation, your environment, your particular case. How do we personalize your care? How does that run up against, Dr. Collins, you know, as Dr. Esserman was saying, you know, we have these very traditional, very set in stone ideals about how to do trials, how to prove science, how to create standard protocols. How does this idea of personalizing therapy and making sure, you know, we are treating every patient the way they should be treated, as Dr. Esserman is saying, and trying to sort of get us to rethink breast cancer in that way, how does that run up against, you know, the ideals of scientific rigor and, you know, the creation of like standard protocols that are proven and established and, you know, have X% effectiveness rate?
I'm with Laura. I think basically standardized protocols. Standardized protocols that say we have to keep doing things the way we've always done them are not the right answer. I think you can have both and. You can have scientific rigor, but you can have precision, personalized approaches to each individual. That really is, I think, the flow of all of what's happening right now in medical research, not just about cancer, but about everything else. And it ought to be true about prevention as well. Can I say a word about a different project, which I think is very much in the same mindset? We really need to understand how people stay healthy, not just how to treat people once they get sick, because maybe we can prevent some of those breast cancers that otherwise are going to come into your clinic. But we don't know how to do that. We have these one-size-fits-all approaches to how you're supposed to stay healthy, and most of the time people ignore them, and they probably should, because they're one-size-fits-all and they probably don't fit that individual all that well. Don't smoke, okay, I'll give you that one. But a lot of the things about diet and exercise, we don't really know what's right. Our whole nutrition research field needs a big kick in the butt here to sort of come into the modern century. How to do that? Well, we need basically a very large, very scientifically designed effort to find out what works. And that is the argument behind what is the largest study that NIH has mounted ever, which when it is completely enrolled will follow 1 million Americans, asking them to be our partners, share their electronic health records, provide blood samples that can be subjected to complete DNA sequencing, walk around with Fitbits and other wearable sensors to keep track of what's happening to them, answer lots of questionnaires, and stay in touch about what's happening over time. And it's going to be a very diverse population, with more than half of them of racial and ethnic minorities, and also oversampling rural groups and people of lower SES status. We've already enrolled 277,000, and the numbers are growing, and that's just over a year and a half. And imagine you have this as a platform for all the other things you'd like to do to understand wellness. Some of these people will have chronic illness. It'll be a great opportunity to find out how best to manage those. Some of those people will come down with cancer. They're already highly motivated. You've got all this legacy data. They're pre-consented for recontact. So enrolling in follow-up trials ought to be fairly straightforward in this situation. But we are going to learn from that what really matters as far as the individual assessment of what it takes to keep you healthy. So this is called All of Us. How many of you have heard of All of Us? I'm curious. Okay. So how many of you have joined All of Us? Oh, come on. Okay. Today, go to joinallofus.org. And you can become part of this national adventure. Join 999,999 other people and become part of the way in which we really figure out how to do precision medicine and precision health instead of one size fits all.
But there's a lot that we already know. We absolutely need to generate all this information. But it is time to change now. I mean, in breast cancer, the biggest controversy is about screening and when to start and when to stop. And there are 7 different guidelines because it's all about one size fits all. Yeah. But there is a ton of information. We can actually look at people's genetics, their breast density. We can do this. So we actually, and by the way, the NCI is helping to fund it, as is PCORI.
This is good.
That's the Wisdom Study, which is women informed to screen depending on measures of risk. We invite people to partner with us and say, you know, should we be screening you every year, starting at 40? Or should we find out what your risk is and not only give you a time to start and stop screening, but figure out if you were at very high risk, what we can do to reduce it. And here's the thing, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on prevention research. We've spent all this money on trying to understand about SNPs. You heard about that from Anne just before this, and we know about these mutations. They're not very common, they're rare, but if you have one, you have huge risk. Why aren't we doing that now? And one of the cool things about this study is we are, now I understand the gold standard is randomization, but you don't learn everything from randomization. And if someone doesn't, that means if you're going to be randomized, you're willing to be assigned to one or the other by chance. But if you feel strongly, we let people join the observational arm because that allows us to find out what people prefer. And that way you can learn from everybody. And I think it comes back again to the end of the day. We need to get our infrastructure matched up to all the fabulous science that's being done so that, you know,
do more with what we have.
In the course of care, why do we have a separate system for research and another system for clinical care? And if the data from clinical care isn't good enough for research, then there's something wrong with our clinical care systems. Right. And if our clinical care systems really worked, and we got the data, we all worked together to collaborate on the data we needed, all your trials would be cheap. You know, 60% of the cost of trials is recollecting data. But more important, our care would be better. The precision analytics would come to your point of care. We actually are working with Salesforce on developing a next generation set of systems. So that in the course of care, you're doing better by your patients, learning for them, trying to find out, collecting data on their quality of life. So you're learning in the course of care. That is what's going to enable real world evidence. Monitoring later to find out if drugs on the market are really doing what they're supposed to be doing. But it makes it seamless to get someone into a trial. This is the future. This is where we need to go. We have to fix the care system.
Dr. Esserman, we've heard your solution to solving the unsolvable. Dr. Collins, how do we solve the unsolvable when it comes to trying to make more and make more of the data, the research that's coming out of the NIH every year?
Well, we are in the process of demanding that anybody that we fund has to make their data accessible, and that is also enforced by clinicaltrials.gov, which now requires you to deposit the data from your trial within 12 months after enrolling the last data point. And of course, we also are moving data sets into publicly accessible places. This All of Us study, all of that data will be accessible to all of you. You can be a citizen scientist and help us figure out what it means with the personal identifiers removed, but everything else is there, so we can all learn from it. Openness, transparency, that's what we're about.
Sean, you've talked about some of the things that you've looked at immediately and addressed. What are some of the things on the horizon that you see that you'd really like to streamline and make a little more efficient?
Well, I mean, I couldn't agree more with real world evidence, real world data. This is super important, and likewise, trial design. We've been we saw this as another one of the big obstacles we needed to overcome was how do we design trials where that are very flexible, where we can continue to add combinations, where we can use a lot of molecular diagnostics and biomarkers to make sure that we're creating multiple different cohorts around these different combinations. And increasingly, the FDA has been very open to doing these kinds of next generation trials. That's what led to our pancreatic platform trial, which was a combination of a IO drug called a CD40 agonist that was really nowheresville in terms of being accepted, but our scientists having access to a ton of information and a lot of visibility over everything happening in immunotherapy are able to look with this sort of bird's eye view and say, okay, we really think that this in combination with standard of care in a very difficult cancer like pancreatic cancer, late stage metastatic pancreatic cancer. And I agree with your points about early detection. If we could detect earlier, we wouldn't be in this situation. But to the extent that patients are coming in with, stage 4, pancreatic cancer, they're inoperable. How do we come up with treatments that are going to work? And part of what we're doing is hopefully changing patient outcomes, but mechanistically understanding, why is it that, these tumors are so protected, their tumor microenvironment is so suppressive that T cells designed by Carl June can't penetrate or get suppressed. How do we armor those cells? So we're thinking along the same lines, and when it comes to data in particular, we realized very quickly we had to build our own internal informatics team that shared, and being in Silicon Valley, it's easier for us to recruit great informatics people. And that team is shared across all 7 of our academic centers, and it definitely speeds up our ability to process data, analyze data, and make sure that data is held and shared in a standardized way. So not nearly at the scale of what Francis is doing, but in our own little universe of immune oncology, that's been really critical.
Thank you very much, Sean, Dr. Collins, Dr. Esserman. It's very clear that we've got a very exciting path forward for perhaps some better collaboration, more efficiency in how we bring new treatments to the American people and how we hopefully prevent disease from occurring in the first place. Thank you so much.
We should talk about it. I mean, we've been running it for 10 years.
Thank you. Goes by fast.
Well, we've reached the end of a very exciting day. I hope you've been as inspired as I have by the conversations and the discussions and really the calls to action that we've heard from some of the leaders in the healthcare community in the United States. I'd like to now call back onto the stage our CEO and Editor-in-Chief, Edward Felsenthal, and my Summit co-chair, Dr. David Agus. David, remember, we're standing between people and reception, so your closing thoughts.
We're standing between people and alcohol is what you're saying. My closing thoughts are very simple. One thing today pissed me off, which was very clear, is that health has become a partisan issue in our country, and it makes no sense. So you saw from this remarkable young actress, Selma Blair, saying, I'm going to be totally vulnerable and talk about my disease. There's no partisanship there at all. You saw whether it be the head of CMS, the head of Secretary of HHS, or the former president, there is no partisanship in health, and yet it's being treated as such, and progress is blocked. And so to me, that was the depressing part. The optimistic part was things are happening, and it's great. They really could be implemented so much quicker and better if we got over this partisan stuff. So Edward is going to fix that.
Yes. Well, we're all going to fix it together. We're all going to fix it together, and I want to both thank everybody who's been with us through the day, all of you, and let you know that you are now officially part of the Time Health community. And we're going to get this group together virtually and physically.
Do we get a handshake
as we
or
go
something,
forward and talk about so many. I mean, it was an incredibly inspiring day. The mosaic of stories, the scientists and the actors and the policymakers and the intersections. So much potential here if we just talk to each other and get beyond the partisan stuff. So thank you all. You're going to hear from us by way of follow-up. Among other things, we will invite you to send us an address if you'd like to get the issue of Time that comes out next week that will pull together a lot of the strands from today. We'd be happy to send it to you.
Do you know the cover, or you're not allowed to say?
I don't know yet. Figure it out. And finally, huge thanks first to Dan Maxey, who's off here somewhere, who's the Dan is the editorial director of the Time 100 franchise and worked extraordinarily long, hard hours to make this event what it's been, and Alice and David, who made it smart. So thank you both.
Thank you.
And go have a toast or a drink or a snack.
Go have a
Thank
piece
you.
of toast?
Thank you.
That's good.
Toast.